Picture this, a misty October morning in northern France, where the fields of Agincourt stretch out like a forgotten promise, heavy with rain and the weight of impending doom. We've all heard the tales of heroic knights clashing in gleaming armor, charging toward eternal glory under waving banners. But the Battle of Agincourt in 1415 wasn't a chivalric romance. It was a brutal slaughter where mud clung like a traitor, arrows fell like judgment, and a ragtag English army crushed the flower of French nobility. This is the story of how nature and ingenuity turned overwhelming odds into a legendary upset, where dysentery weakened archers outsmarted armored giants. We're diving into the elements that made this possible, from the desperate march to the final, haunting aftermath. But pause for a moment and ask yourself, what would you do if everything stacked against you? If survival meant embracing the chaos? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're new here, hit subscribe to uncover more unfiltered history. Let's step into the fray. Henry V's army landed in France with bold ambitions, but reality hit hard from the start. After besieging Harfleur for over a month, the English forces were a shadow of their former strength. 12,000 men had arrived, but dysentery, the camp killers, swept through like a silent reaper, claiming thousands before a single sword was drawn. Imagine it. Soldiers doubled over in agony, their bodies betraying them with relentless cramps and bloody flux, all while the siege dragged on under relentless rain. Henry, the young king with a crown to prove, pushed forward anyway, his men reduced to perhaps 6,000 effective fighters. They were mostly longbowmen, yeomen from English villages, not the polished knights of legend. These were farmers and craftsmen, conscripted and trained to pull bows that required years of practice, their backs scarred from the effort. Now, they marched north toward Calais, seeking safety and supplies. But the French shadowed them every step. The path wound through sodden forests and swollen rivers, each mile a test of will. Boots sank into mud, rations dwindled to moldy bread and salted scraps, and the constant drizzle chilled bones already weakened by illness. Men dropped from exhaustion, left where they fell if they couldn't keep up. Yet in this misery lay a hidden edge. The English moved lighter, unburdened by the heavy plate armor that weighed down their pursuers. Henry's scouts reported the French amassing a force of 20 to 30,000, brimming with confident nobles eager for glory. But the king didn't flee. He turned to face them, knowing his men's desperation could forge unbreakable resolve. What strikes me here is the shift from vulnerability to power, how the very sickness and hardship that should have doomed them instead stripped away excess, leaving a lean, focused force ready to fight for their lives. You see, when you've stared down death in camp, the battlefield feels like just another trial. As the armies converged on that narrow strip of land near Agincourt, the terrain whispered warnings that only the astute would hear. Heavy rains had turned the freshly plowed fields into a viscous trap, a sea of mud that favored the nimble over the mighty. The battlefield was constricted, flanked by woods that funneled the French into a bottleneck no wider than a few hundred yards. Their commanders, flush with numerical superiority, dismissed the ground as inconsequential. After all, their knights were the pinnacle of warfare, clad in full plate that gleamed like silver fortresses. But as the French advanced, the mud revealed its treachery. Horses burdened with barding and riders plunged knee-deep, their hooves churning the earth into a sucking mire. Knights dismounted to lead the charge, but their armor, 60 to 80 pounds of steel, turned every step into torment. Imagine the scene. Proud lords, descendants of Charlemagne, staggering forward, their visors fogging with labored breath, legs burning as the ground clung like desperate hands. One false step and you'd topple, crushed under the press of your own comrades pushing from behind. The English, positioned uphill on drier ground, watched this unfold with grim anticipation. Their archers, lightly armored in padded jacks, stood firm, unhindered by the quagmire. This wasn't mere luck. Henry had chosen the field wisely, turning nature into an ally. The mud slowed the French to a crawl, exposing them for precious minutes. And in those moments, the true horror began to unfold. A reminder that wars aren't won by numbers alone, but by the unseen forces that level the proud. What really gets to me is the irony, how the French, so assured in their chivalry, became victims of the very earth they sought to conquer. Their grandeur reduced to floundering desperation. With the French mired and vulnerable, the English longbows sang their deadly chorus. These weren't toys. Each bow, crafted from yew, stood as tall as a man and demanded the strength of a lifetime's labor to draw. English law had mandated archery practice for years, turning villagers into masters who could loose 10 to 12 arrows a minute with lethal accuracy. As the French slogged closer, Henry gave the order, and the sky darkened. Thousands of bodkin-tipped arrows arced upward, their narrow points designed to punch through mail and find gaps in plate. The first volley struck like divine wrath, shafts embedding in horses' flanks, piercing gorgets and visors, felling men before they could swing a blade. Screams echoed across the field as knights clutched at feathered wounds, blood mixing with mud. The French pressed on, but each wave met the same fate. Arrows raining relentlessly, piling bodies into gruesome barriers that further impeded the advance. Crossbowmen on the French side faltered. Their weapons, slower to reload and hampered by wet strings, offered scant reply. English archers, protected by stakes driven into the ground, picked targets at will, aiming for the unarmored mounts first to unhorse the elite. Panic rippled through the ranks as nobles fell alongside common men-at-arms, the arrow storm erasing distinctions of birth. This was no fair duel. It was methodical carnage, where range and rate of fire turned superiority into slaughter. Yet beneath the terror, there's a profound lesson in preparation. How the English, empowered by simple innovation, shifted from underdogs to executioners. You can't help but feel the weight of it. One side's lifetime of training clashing against another's hubris, arrows whispering that equality comes in death. As the distance closed to nothing, the battle devolved into a nightmare of steel and sludge. The French front lines, decimated but determined, crashed into the English with a thunderous impact. But the mud had done its work. Knights arrived exhausted, their formations shattered, easy prey for the waiting men-at-arms. English infantry, armed with poleaxes and bills, hacked downward, while archers dropped bows to draw daggers and mallets, closing in for the kill. Visors were pried open, blades thrust into eyes or throats. Intimate, savage work that turned the field into a charnel house. The press was so tight that men could barely lift arms, suffocating in the crush as comrades' bodies piled higher. Henry himself fought in the melee, his crown dented by French axes, embodying the resolve that held his line. Then came the darkest turn. Fearing a French rally or prisoner revolt, the king ordered captives slain. Knights and lords, stripped of arms and promised ransom, met cold steel instead, their pleas lost in the din. This wasn't glory. It was survival's grim calculus, where mercy yielded to necessity. The French wavered, then broke, fleeing into the mud that now trapped them utterly. English pursuers cut them down without pity, the rout claiming more lives than the clash itself. In mere hours, the battle ended, leaving a field of twisted corpses and broken dreams. What haunts me is the transformation from ordered ranks to primal frenzy, where identity dissolves in blood, empowering the victors but scarring their souls forever. The sun dipped low as the echoes faded, revealing a victory as Pyrrhic as it was profound. English losses numbered around 400, a miracle against the French toll of 6,000 to 10,000, including dukes, counts, and the constable himself. Bodies lay in heaps, the nobility's finery soiled beyond recognition, while survivors looted rings and armor under Henry's watchful eye.
The king proclaimed it God's favor, a divine endorsement of his claim to France, boosting morale that would fuel the 100 Years' War for decades. Back home, ballads spread the tale, immortalizing Agincourt as a triumph of the common man over aristocratic might. But for those who fought, the ghosts lingered, wounds festering without proper care, memories of comrade screams haunting quiet nights. Mass graves swallowed the dead, unmarked save for the earth's silent vigil. This wasn't just a battle. It reshaped warfare, proving that technology and tactics could humble tradition. Yet the human cost whispers a caution. Glory fades, but trauma endures, shifting survivors from warriors to weary men longing for home. Looking back, Agincourt teaches us that legends are forged in mud, not marble. That underdogs rise not through strength alone, but adaptability and resolve. The French, blinded by numbers and honor, fell to arrows and earth, a stark contrast to Henry's calculated grit. It's a story of empowerment, where ordinary souls defied fate, but also a warning against the hubris that invites ruin. In our own lives, when odds tower like those nights, remember, embrace the chaos, turn weaknesses into weapons, and you might just rewrite your ending. What aspect resonates with you? The mud's betrayal or the arrow's justice? Drop it in the comments and subscribe for more dives into history's raw truths. Until next time, stay curious.